Book 1, Law of Salimi, Chapter 52, Kokoro. Remember about the chapter on how I had to say goodbye to my rabbit? That was the beginning for this journey of rediscovery of my life, and this chapter would be the continuation of that story. The more you learn, the less you know. Ever heard this saying? Let me do my best to try explaining its meaning. From my understanding, as a person started to learn new knowledge, it will open up towards new branches, doors, and paths unto other related knowledge in this world and beyond. Essentially, it means that you gain more knowledge as well as the realization that the increased knowledge also brought about the awareness that there are much more knowledge that have yet to be discovered and known by the person. In short, with more knowledge, you will realize that this universe and beyond, there are much more knowledge that began to be accessible and available. In essence, from the perspective of Islam, everything in this universe and beyond belongs solely to Allah the Almighty, which include the wealth of knowledge that we had acquired so far by the countless civilization of mankind throughout the short history of Earth. The comparison of every knowledge ever discovered by mankind is like a small drop of ink that falls into the vast ocean on this earth, which represents the knowledge that belongs to Allah the All-Knowing. In effect, my understanding for the perspective of Islam when it comes to truth and knowledge delineated that whatever knowledge that we, mankind, had acquired on this earth, if it was proven to be true, would simply mean that it coincides with the true nature of earth as established by Allah the Almighty. For example, in the case of floating rock or stone, which was related to the event of Isra Mi'raj, where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ ascended to the heaven from the mosque Al-Aqsa. According to several scholars who had seen the actual rock, instead of several allegedly fake floating rocks photos that widely spread over the internet claim that it truly is floating. According to these scholars who had explained it to me, claimed that the rock was later supported with several pillars underneath so that it would not cause fear or obsession for anyone who would perform prayer at the mosque. If I remembered correctly, I was told that the rock was floating with enough space underneath it where prayers could be performed underneath it. I was also told that it was rather a huge rock, which I could only imagine that it must have had floated rather high in order for Muslims to perform prayers under the rock. Nonetheless, it was very difficult for me to actually provide any scientific evidence since I had never seen the rock myself, while it seemed the most pictures available online would appear to be as fake, albeit, if we think about it logically, why would those scholars would made up lies about the stone to me, considering all of these scholars were very knowledgeable in the teachings of Islam and knew about the sins of lying. Moreover, I would assume that these scholars would possess impeccable faith in Allah, hence do not have any ulterior motive to make up any lies to me. Scientifically speaking, I do believe that the floating rock is true, even if it does violate the rule of gravity as introduced by Isaac Newton. If you consider my statement earlier in this chapter, Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity, which appeared to remain true until today. However, I would like to restate that the law of gravity is applicable to everything on this earth as long as it is within the will of Allah the Almighty. In the case of the floating rock, Allah the Almighty wills it to float, so it floats. Law of gravity or any knowledge of science would have no effect over it because it is the will of Allah the Almighty. This is my understanding about the knowledge on this earth, where everything was true, would simply coincide with the will of Allah the All-Knowing. With that said, as I began discovering and researching about various knowledge during my study at the university, I started to implement everything that I had learned into my actual life. Instead of buying the rabbit, I chose to remain using my sister's 40 years old motorcycle. Soon, I also began changing my lifestyle towards practicing the concept of moderation living in accordance to the teachings of Islam. I started to implement Islam as my way of life. Instead of focusing about becoming a multimillionaire, I am more concerned about changing myself into a better human being. I was changing my life from bad to good, from good to better, and from better to the best possible. It meant that I had to make a significant paradigm shift in my mind and later put it into actual practice. This process took a huge chunk of effort and massive amount of time to make the changes in my life. It would be fair to even say that most of my research time were involved into changing my life for the better. In my heart, I do not care too much about finishing my PhD program in order to obtain the PhD certificate and the title of a doctor from the university. I was engrossed with the discovery of knowledge, especially about improving my understanding about Islam and what it actually meant towards changing my life for the better. It was also about making myself a good human being and a great Muslim in the path of Islam. With my intentions started to evolve towards changing myself and practicing Islam as a way of life, I prayed to Allah the All-Knowing to provide me with right path and guidance into my journey so that I would be able to walk the straight path towards understanding Islam and on the path of becoming a true Muslim. I realized that my life was not reflecting a true Muslim way of life, so I took this chance to change myself, and I am still making the changes in my life. In doing so, I felt that my prayers were answered where I had met a great scholar who suddenly emerged into my life. In the actual fact, this great scholar was known to me as early as I can remember, yet he had never emerged himself into my life as a scholar who showed me the missing link in my PhD research. Let's call this great scholar as Respondent 002 in order to protect his true identity in this book. Respondent 002 was a great scholar that specialized in Arabic language. Before I began my PhD journey, he never spoke to me as the great scholar that he had emerged into my life who provided the great guidance for my PhD research. In fact, Respondent 001, who was my supervisor, knew about Respondent 002 and were close friends in the academic circle. If you are able to identify the true and real identity of Respondent 002, you won't be able to find him in any television show or YouTube, regardless of the amount of knowledge that he possessed. The reason behind this was simply because of his modesty and practice of moderation living that he had implemented throughout his lifetime, based on my own observation. As a great scholar, he would never admit himself to be known as such as or even dare to think himself as one. He was very humble and possibly even at much higher level when compared to the heavenly monsters that I had met in UiTM campus Menggatal during my diploma studies. Despite of his opportunity to gain and accumulate tremendous materialistic wealth, I had never seen him to live life beyond the concept of moderation as encouraged in the teachings of Islam. I had never truly sensed his true ability, but I do realize that he had one of the sharpest minds in any scholars that I had ever met in my life. When I explained to him of my status of progress for my PhD thesis, it took him a short duration of time to actually come up with the missing link in my PhD thesis. When I had presented the missing link as suggested by Respondent 002 to my supervisor, he approved it to be accurate. The final conclusion that I had took about 7 years to discover had been pointed out by respondent 002 with absolute accuracy. In the duration of 7 years, I learned about what had caused the problems related to the chaos affecting our present society today. The cause of numerous problems in our society had been linked to one significant concept, which is the practice of riba. The question was, how do society change to implement the teachings of Islam in order to start moving towards achieving ideal Islamic nation, or IIN? Should the society choose the political route which had been implemented in Malaysia? Should the society use the extreme measures such as taking over the nation using firearms? There were numerous possibilities which might end up in failures and causing tremendous harm to mankind. So with haste, respondent 002 offered a simple solution which turned out to be the missing link of my PhD thesis. What is the missing link? What should society do to change our nation towards becoming an ideal Islamic nation? Any of you, the reader, would care to guess? Can anyone be able to provide the accurate answer before I reveal the missing link? The answer is already been revealed to you. The answer is the title of this chapter. If you are flipping the pages back to see the title of this chapter, it might be that you were not too conscious about the trend of my writing. Nonetheless, there you go. The missing link is Kokoro. What is Kokoro, you ask? If you would ask a Japanese to translate what it means into an English word, I would assume it would be pronounced as Hatto. Kokoro is heart. The missing link of my research is the heart. Obviously, respondent 002 did not use the term Kokoro when he explained it to me. In effect, based on my understanding from his own explanation, in order for a person to change our nation from the present state where the practice of riba or usury is rampant into an ideal Islamic nation where riba would be absolutely abolished in every industry, begins with a change of heart. Each individual person in society should begin to change his or her heart by embedding and cultivating the intention to change from bad to good, from good to better, and from better to the best. In doing so, every individual would begin to implement the true practice of lifestyle based on the teachings of Islam, which is implementing the concept of moderation living and Islam as a way of life. When I realized that this missing link had completed the final puzzle of my PhD thesis, I began writing the complete PhD thesis for submission at the university. A part of that, I began to change my life, beginning with my intention to become a good human being and a great Muslim. I put my knowledge into actual practice, which required a tremendous amount of effort and time. I focused in implementing moderation living and Islam as a way of life. After 7 years had elapsed, I am still walking the same path of becoming a true Muslim, based on the teachings of Islam, Sharia, and the true essence and spirit of Islam, Tesi. This is where I am with my life today. This is where I am in my life today. This is the true reason I am smiling at this moment, at this very moment. Alhamdulillah. With that, it ends chapter 52. Thank you very much for listening and hope to see you again in the next chapter.